Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. First time in Helsinki was 15 years ago. I was trained by KTL on public health and smoking prevention back then. I started my studies in smoking behavior, and then 11 years ago I moved into doping behavior. And trust me, there are some commonalities there which we can dedicate a whole conference to discuss the bridges between the two public health behaviors. So my topic, the presentation today is about the use of performance and image enhancement drugs and recreational fitness sport, prevalence, motives, and policy recommendations. And I'll try to keep it short and not too complicated, although we could dedicate 15 days talking about this issue, not just only 15 minutes. So the structure of my talk, understanding what is the use of performance and image enhancement drugs in the setting of recreational and fitness sport, some research about the reasons and the motivations, what is driving this behavior from an individual perspective as well as a social contextual perspective and the dynamic interplay between the two. And finally, what can we do effectively if we want to bring changes in the number of people using steroids and other drugs. So my expertise, 11 years of doing research, we've already completed more than 12 projects actually funded by the World Doping Agency, International Olympics Committee, and projects from Erasmus Plus Sport, more than 30 publications about doping behavior in recreational and in elite competitive sports, so different fields of that behavior. My main focus is on the psychological processes, decision-making processes, self-regulation. Why do they do it? What is driving their behavior? And how can we inform preventive interventions based on this information? And we then, in the competitive sport, moved further into understanding whistleblowing policies, which is a new era of research in what we're doing. But my actual expertise for today's talk comes straight from experiential learning. That was my first coach in 1995. 1996, he won the European Championship in bodybuilding. That was my second coach in Greece. They are both Greeks. And that was the guy I grew up with because his gym was just next door to my house. I used to see really big people in the 80s and the 90s just going there. And within this setting, in 1995 and 1996, I was introduced to this substance, which by the time was a nutritional supplement. So they told me, if you want to become big like these guys and you're training, you're putting in the effort. I was training like 4 hours a day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, in the evening or late afternoon. I was eating a whole chicken as lunch because I needed protein, and they said instead of eating a lot of chicken and chickpeas, you should try these substances. Back then, DHEA was a nutritional supplement marketed by an American brand, an American company. 2 years later, it was included in the list of prohibited substances of the World Anti-Doping Agency. And one of the reasons I'm bringing up the World Doping Agency and the prohibited list is that I want to draw a difference here between doping in sport and doping in what we're studying and what we're talking about today, which is the recreational setting. So this would be the definition of doping according to the World Anti-Doping Code. This is what defines doping behavior, and this is what the sport organizations, national doping organizations abide by. They're using those definitions. But the definitions that they're mentioning here in the World Doping Agency Code is not really relevant to the recreational setting for many reasons, right? One of them is that we don't have necessarily any kind of competitive drive there. They not necessarily compete in a manner of organized sport within the context of organized sport that abide by the rules and principles and regulations of the World Doping Agency. We're talking about amateur, maybe non-competitive or amateur competitive, recreational sports, grassroots sport, and in many countries, except of course Nordic countries and especially Denmark and Sweden, these are largely unregulated. We don't have things like police or other authorities going into the gyms and regulating what is happening there. Actually, it's completely unregulated in different countries. In the UK, it's completely unregulated. Actually, in the UK, using steroids for personal use is perfectly legal. Steroids are defined as Class C drugs, which means that there is no criminal offense if you're using them for yourself, right? So we have variation in different countries across Europe, across the globe. And the topic we're addressing today has to do with something else besides the doping as we know it from the case in Russia, with a Russian ban recently, and other cases of doping in sport. So numbers first. I am a numbers person. We have mixed findings because we have different measures. We don't have consistent measures to assess the prevalence of performance and image enhancement drugs. In some cases, we have contamination because we're asking people about using nutritional supplements, doping substances, both of them, pro-hormones, which fall in the gray area. Some of them are prohibited by the World Doping Agency, others are not. So there is lack of consistency in the measurement and in the way of asking the questions, of course. So if we go to the lower end, it would be 3 to 4% on average from the international literature. But the upper end, with large surveys across different countries, one of them we published in 2017, and it had data from 5 different countries, it's between 18 to 22%. Now, if you project 18 to 22% in the millions of people that have gym subscriptions, gym memberships in Europe, we're talking about a lot of people. Right? Not just an elite few in competitive sport who want to use drugs because they want to win the gold medal. We're talking about people who are weekend warriors. They're actually using drugs because it's part of the culture, it's part of their set of expectations and of their concerns over muscularity, which I will present later on. So we have some nice data from the studies done by Jim McVie and his colleagues, the PIEDs survey with Welsh Public Health. 73% of users said that they used both injectable and oral forms of anabolic steroids. Anabolic steroids, anabolic androgenic steroids, is the most common type when we're talking about performance and image enhancement drugs in non-competitive sport. Growth hormone and peptides are also relevant. But in the gym, you won't be using any kind of sophisticated doping methods like hyperbaric chambers or blood doping or even gene doping, simply because people don't have the money and they don't really care about improving performance in this way. So this is another distinction between doping in this setting as compared to doping in competitive sport. Mean age of use is 25 years. So unlike other forms of drug use where the age of initiation might be towards the late adolescence, and the peak is around this age as well. In steroids, it's a bit higher. It's an older age group here. And the age of onset is around the age of 20, again with data coming from the PIEDs study from Welsh Public Health. Now, why do they do it? I think this is the million-dollar question, as they name it. Well, muscle growth and muscularity concerns might be one of the main drivers. This has to do with drive for muscularity, the tendency to bulk up muscles, to become bigger, to become stronger, or to portray yourself as stronger to the others. It's also associated with a condition that is now included in the diagnostic manual for psychological disorders, DSM, muscle dysmorphia. And this is kind of the reverse anorexia. So in anorexia nervosa, we have really thin people feeling that they're fat and they have to lose weight, so they force themselves into strict dieting practices, forced vomiting, and practices like that. On the other extreme, we have muscle dysmorphia. We have really, really huge guys like this person over there feeling that they're really thin, so they need to bulk up more and more and more, so they're engaged in forced eating, higher caloric intake, and use of drugs because they want to achieve this image, this ideal. Faster recovery after training and reaching one's physical limits are again some of the main motives that we find in a large survey that we published in 2017, which led us think that probably we're talking about people who develop a competitive mindset. They're exercisers, they're not necessarily competing for golden medals, but their way of thinking about their exercise is highly competitive. Why would you want to recover really fast after your heavy training? What's the matter if you recover in 3 days instead of 1 day or instead of 2 days? So this kind of urgency, quick fix after a heavy training is another reason. And of course, curiosity, which comes in certain situations, in certain contexts where you perceive that the prevalence of these substances is higher in a given group. You're more curious about trying it yourself and see what would be the effect on your performance and your behavior. Now here we have a more complex diagram. I don't want to baffle you or to pretend that I'm, hardcore scientist, but this portrays the complex interplay between cultural standards, expectations, and how they become internalized and translated into behaviors and emotions about ourselves. So we have the internalization of cultural standards, expectations. How do I think that other people would want me to look like? So what is a manly look? What is a muscular figure, for instance? This is associated with body surveillance. I'm always checking myself in the mirror constantly, compulsively. I'm obsessed with my image. And if I don't really reach the goal, my ideal, I might experience higher body shame. Now, shame is not just a self-conscious emotion, it's a risk factor for depression and anxiety and a lot of mental health problems as well. The thing is that body shame is related to drive for muscularity, which is then associated with positive beliefs and intentions to use anabolic steroids. So, in a way, the reason I'm showing this diagram is that I want to show you that using steroids or other performance-enhancing drugs is more like a means to an end. And the motivation comes from the internalization of culture, standard or expectations, and the way we experience them emotionally as well. So the more negative emotions, the more shame, the more guilt that I'm not really fitting this ideal body type, more likely to lead people into considering different ways of reaching their goals. One of them is the use of anabolic steroids. And of course, always we have nutritional supplements. This is a gray area, really. Again, in the UK, if I want to buy pro-hormones, which are banned by the World Doping Agency, I can do it in a nutritional supplement store. If I go to Greece or Denmark or Finland, it is illegal. I cannot do it. If I go to Poland, I can buy it. So we don't really have harmonized policies about what constitutes a nutritional supplement and where do we draw the line. So the question then becomes, I'm a competitive athlete, I'm a part of organized sport. Let's say that I'm a bodybuilder under the International Federation of Bodybuilding, which is signatory to the World Doping Agency. In that case, supposedly, I shouldn't be using any drugs, I shouldn't be using any supplements that are pro-hormones, for instance. At the same time, if I don't compete for these guys, but I'm a bodybuilder and compete in the amateur club of bodybuilders, I can take whatever I want because I'm not tested. But then again, it's not a question about what is legal and what is not, it's a question about what is healthy and what is unhealthy. Because in both cases, you're using drugs to achieve a goal, to reach a goal. And that would be muscularity. The role of nutritional supplements is a dubious one. We have studies showing that users of nutritional supplements are 2 to 3 times more likely to self-report steroid use as well. And this is the case in different studies, meta-analyses. They have summarized the findings from over 20 studies over the last 10 years, and they have reached this conclusion. And it is both in competitive and in amateur sport. We have also found in our studies that nutritional supplement users who don't have any prior experience with steroids, they have more positive attitudes and stronger intentions to use steroids in the future, right? Younger adolescent athletes. The question is why? Now, some people say that there is a gateway, so supplements are a gateway to steroids. There is no evidence so far that there is causation. There is a strong correlation. Probably we should regulate supplements differently. We should look into this further, but I wouldn't support a causal link here, but there is definitely a coincidence between the two. Very quickly, one ongoing project that we have now tries to address, and I'm doing this with my sociologist colleagues, I don't have a clue about sociology myself, but I can understand it. We're talking about liquid modernity and the shifting identities in today's culture, trying to understand what it means to use steroids. And by doing some ethnographic interviews with steroid users in the UK, we found out that one of the reasons is that these people, they didn't have proper training about strength and muscularity at the very beginning. So they were told that if you use steroids, you will be big. They were not provided with any other knowledge, no other information about how to achieve their goals successfully without using any type of drugs. And the other thing was that there is a drug use culture in fitness and gym settings, which is propagated sometimes unintentionally. This came from the news a few years ago. Glasgow University, they used buckets so that students who use steroids could dispose their needles. They did it with good intentions, but this creates automatically the norm that people in the university gym are using steroids, and if you're using two, just dispose your needles there. A good cause, but mixed messages actually that we're sending out. The other thing, and that's my last remark, I think, before I go to the policy recommendations very quickly, is that there is a huge beast culture, and this should concern us right now. We have moved from the ideals of a sane mind and a sound body to an insane mind in an insanely big body, muscular body, freakish body, all right? So we have to be concerned about these shifting ideals, these shifting portrayals of what is to be a man, what does muscularity mean, and so forth, and not just a gendered approach, but it also in males and females as well. Not just a sport issue. I won't overlap with the other presentations. I know from their titles that they will be talking about physical and mental health effects of steroid use. I will just summarize a bit now what's happening here. It's a perpetuating drug use culture, and we definitely have to do something about it. It's a public health matter. And if you detect and punish, you won't achieve as much as you would achieve with education and evidence-based education. We'll be happy to discuss with you during the break. Thank you. Thanks for your time and for the invitation again.